Book of Heaven, Volume 2, Part 7. July 9th, 1899. Jesus shares his pains in order to continue his passion. This morning, Jesus wanted to renew the pains of the crucifixion. First, he transported me outside of myself, up on a mountain, and he asked me whether I wanted to be crucified. And I, yes, my Jesus, I yearn for nothing but the cross. As I was saying this, a huge cross appeared. He laid me upon it and nailed me to it with his own hands. What atrocious pains I suffered in feeling my hands and feet being pierced through by those nails. And what's more, they were blunt, and it was very difficult and painful to make them penetrate. But with Jesus, everything was tolerable. After he finished crucifying me, he told me, "My daughter, I make use of you in order to continue my passion. Since my glorified body can no longer be capable of suffering, by coming into you, I make use of your body, just as I used mine during the course of my mortal life, to be able to continue to suffer my passion, and therefore to be able to offer you as living victim of reparation and propitiation before divine justice." After this it seemed that heaven opened, and a multitude of saints came down, all armed with swords. A voice, like thunder, came out from within that multitude, saying, "We come to defend the justice of God, and to take revenge on men who have so much abused his mercy." Who can say what was happening on earth at this descent of the saints? I can only say that some were fighting at one point, some at another. Some were fleeing, and some were hiding. It seemed that all were in dismay. July 14th, 1899. Jesus cannot leave one who loves him. These days, my adorable Jesus continues to make himself seen very few times. His visit is like a flash. While one would want to keep looking, it is already gone. And if sometimes he stays for a little while, it is almost always in silence. Other times he says something, but the moment he goes away, it seems to me that he withdraws that word, together with the light that comes to me from his word. So much so that afterwards I no longer remember anything of what he said. My mind remains in the same confusion as before. What miserable state! My dear Jesus, have pity on this miserable one. Continue to make use of your mercy. So in order not to be too long, saying what happened to me day by day, I will now say, all at once, a few words that he told me in these past days. I remember that, after I had shed most bitter tears, Jesus made himself seen, and since I lamented to him that he had left me, Jesus called to himself many angels and saints, and turning to them he said, "Listen to what she says, that I have left her. Tell her a little bit. Can I leave those who love me? She has loved me. How can I leave her?" The saints were in agreement with the Lord, and I remained more humiliated and confounded than before. Another time after I said to him, "In the end, you will end up leaving me completely." Jesus said to me, "Daughter, I cannot leave you, and as a pledge of this I have placed my sufferings in you." Then, while I was occupied with this thought, "How is it, Lord, that you have permitted the coming of the confessor? Everything could have passed between me and you." In one instant, I found myself outside of myself, lying on a cross, but there was no one who could nail me to it. I began to pray the Lord to come to crucify me himself, and Jesus came and told me, "See how necessary it is for the priest to be in the middle of my works, and this is still help to complete the crucifixion. Indeed, without anyone else, you cannot crucify yourself by yourself. It always takes the help of others." July 18th, 1899. How sacramental Jesus and the soul draw and bind each other. It continues almost always in the same way. This time it seemed to me that in my heart there was sacramental Jesus, and from the Holy Host he spread many rays in my interior, and many threads came out of my heart, which intertwined with all those rays of light. It seemed to me that Jesus, with his love, would draw the whole of my heart to himself, and my heart, with those threads, would draw and bind the whole of Jesus to stay with me. July 22nd, 1899. How the cross renders the soul transparent. How to avoid the precipice. This morning my adorable Jesus made himself seen with a golden cross, all resplendent, hanging from his neck. And in looking at it, he was immensely pleased. In one instant the confessor was there present, and Jesus said to him, "The sufferings of these past days have increased the splendor of the cross, so much so that in looking at it I take great delight." Then he turned to me and told me, "The cross communicates such splendor to the soul as to render her transparent, and just as, when an object is transparent, one can give it all the colors he wants, in the same way, with its light, the cross gives all features and the most beautiful shapes that can possibly be imagined, not only by others, but by the very soul who experiences them. Furthermore, on a transparent object, one immediately detects the dust, the little stains, and even a shadow. Such is the cross. Since it renders the soul transparent, it immediately reveals to the soul the little defects, the slightest imperfections, so much so that there is no masterly hand more capable than the cross in keeping the soul prepared to render her a worthy dwelling of the God of heaven. Who can say what I comprehended about the cross, and how enviable is the soul who possesses it? After this, he transported me outside of myself, and I found myself at the top of a staircase, extremely high, which had a precipice under it. And what's more, the steps of this staircase were movable and so narrow that one could barely put the tips of his toes on it. What terrified the most was the precipice, and the fact that one could find no support whatsoever. And if one tried to cling to the steps, they would come off. The sight of other people, almost all of them falling, put a shiver in the bones. Yet there was no other way than going through that staircase. So I tried. But after going up only 2 or 3 steps, seeing the great danger for me of falling into the abyss, I began to call Jesus to come to my aid. Not knowing how, I found Jesus near me, and he told me, "My daughter, what you have seen is the path which all men go through on this earth. The movable steps, on which they cannot even lean to find support, are the human supports, earthly things, which are such that, if one tries to lean on them, instead of giving him help, they give him a push to fall more quickly into hell. The safest means is to climb, almost flying, without touching the ground, by force of one's arms, with eyes all fixed on oneself without looking at others, and also by keeping them all intent on me, in order to receive help and strength. In this way, one can easily avoid the precipice." July 28, 1899. The cross is the noblest mark in the soul. This morning my adorable Jesus came, with an appearance all admirable and mysterious. He was wearing a chain around his neck, hanging over his whole breast. At one end of the chain, one could see something like a bow. At the other end, something like a quiver full of precious stones and gems, which formed an ornament of the most beautiful sort on the breast of my sweet Jesus. He also had a lance in his hand. While in this appearance he told me, "The human life is a game. Some play pleasure, some play money, some their own lives, and many other games that they play. I too delight in playing with souls. But what are these jokes that I make? They are the crosses which I send. If they receive them with resignation, and they thank me for them, I amuse myself and I play with them, delighting immensely, receiving great honor and glory, and letting them make the greatest gains." As he was saying this, he began to touch me with the lance. From the bow and the quiver came out all those precious stones that were contained in it, and they turned into many crosses and arrows that wounded the creatures. Some of them, but extremely few, rejoiced, kissed them, and thanked him, engaging in a game with Jesus. Others then would take them and throw them in his face. Oh, how afflicted was Jesus left, and what a great loss for those souls! Then Jesus added, "This is the thirst which I cried out on the cross, such that unable to quench it entirely at that time, I delight in continuing to quench it in the souls of my dear ones who suffer. So when you suffer, you come to give a refreshment to my thirst." As he came other times, and I prayed him to free the confessor who was suffering, he told me, "My daughter, don't you know that the noblest mark I can impress in my dear children is the cross?" July 30th, 1899. Do not judge your neighbor. It continues almost always in the same way. This morning, as Jesus transported me outside of myself according to his usual way, we passed through the midst of many people, and the majority of them were intent on judging other people's actions, without looking at their own. My beloved Jesus told me, "The surest means to be upright with one's neighbor is to not look at all at what they are doing, because looking, thinking, and judging is all the same. Besides, by looking at his neighbor, one comes to defraud his own soul. Therefore it happens that he is not upright either with himself or with his neighbor or with God. After this I said to him, "My only good, it has been a while since you gave me even just a kiss." And so we kissed each other. Then, almost wanting to correct me, he added, "My daughter, what I recommend to you is to preserve and cherish my words, because my word is eternal and holy, as I am myself, and by preserving it in your heart and profiting from it, you will have your sanctification and will receive an eternal splendor as recompense produced by my word. By doing otherwise, your soul would receive a void, and you would remain my debtor." July 31st, 1899. Intellectual communication. The mouth remains mute. Jesus came also this morning, though always in silence. But I was most content as long as I had my treasure, Jesus, because by having him, I had all my contentments. In seeing him, I comprehended many things about his beauty, about his goodness, and other things. But since it was all through the intelligence, and by means of intellectual communication, the mouth is incapable of expressing anything, so I let it pass in silence. August 1st, 1899. On Purity. This morning, my most gentle Jesus, carrying me outside of myself, made me see the corruption into which mankind has decayed. It is horrifying to think about it. While I was in the midst of these people, almost crying, Jesus was saying, "Oh man, how you have disfigured, deformed, disennobled yourself. Oh man, I made you so that you would be my living temple, and you instead have made of yourself the dwelling of the devil. Look, even the plants, by being covered with leaves and with flowers and fruits, teach you honesty and the modesty you must have with your body. And you, having lost any modesty and even the natural reserve you should have rendered yourself worse than the beasts, so much so that I have nothing else to which to liken you. You were my image, but now I no longer recognize you. Even more, I am so horrified at your impurities that the mere sight of you gives me nausea, and you yourself force me to flee from you." While Jesus was saying this, I felt tortured by the pain of seeing my beloved Jesus so embittered. So I said to him, "Lord, you are right that you find nothing good in man any more, and that he has reached such blindness that he cannot even keep to the laws of nature any more. So if you want to look at man, you will do nothing but send chastisements. Therefore I pray you to keep your gaze on your mercy, and so everything will be remedied." As I was saying this, Jesus told me, "Daughter, give me a refreshment for my pains." In the act of saying this, he removed the crown of thorns, which seemed to be sunken into his adorable head, and he drove it into mine. I felt most bitter pains, but I was content that Jesus was being refreshed. After this he told me, "Daughter, I greatly love pure souls, and just as I am forced to flee from the impure, I am drawn by the pure, as by a magnet, to dwell with them. To pure souls I gladly lend my mouth to let them speak with my own tongue. Therefore they have to make no effort to convert souls. With these souls I delight not only in continuing my passion within them, and therefore still continuing redemption, but what's more, I greatly delight in glorifying my own virtues in them." August 2nd, 1899. Correspondence to Jesus. This morning my adorable Jesus made himself seen, all afflicted and almost indignant with men, threatening to send the usual chastisements, and to make people die suddenly under lightnings, hail, and fire. I prayed him very much to placate himself, and Jesus told me, "The iniquities that rise from the earth up to heaven are so many, that if prayer and souls who are victims before me were missing for a quarter of an hour, I would make fire come out of the earth and inundate the people." Then he added, "See how many graces I was to pour upon the creatures, but since I find no correspondence, I am forced to retain them within myself. Even more, they make me change them into chastisement. Be careful, you, O my daughter, to correspond to me in the so many graces I am pouring into you, because correspondence is the open door to let me enter into the heart and form in it my dwelling. Correspondence is like that good welcome, that esteem, which is used with people when they come to visit us, in such a way that, drawn by that respect, by those affable manners used with them, they are forced to come again, and reach the point of not being able to detach themselves. Everything is in corresponding to me, and according to how souls correspond to me and treat me on earth, so will I behave with them in heaven. Making them find the doors open, I will invite the whole celestial court to welcome them, and I will place them on the most sublime throne. But it will be all the opposite for those who do not correspond to me. August 7th, 1899. About our nothingness. This morning my lovable Jesus was not coming. After much waiting and waiting, finally he came. My confusion and annihilation was such that I was unable to tell him anything. Jesus said to me, "The more you annihilate yourself and come to know your nothingness, the more my humanity, unleashing rays of light, will communicate to you my virtues." I said to him, "Lord, I am so bad and ugly as to be horrifying to myself. What must I be before you?" And Jesus, "If you are ugly, I am the one who can make you beautiful." And in the act of saying this, he sent a light from himself to my soul, and it seemed that he would communicate his beauty to it. Then, embracing me, he began to say, "How beautiful you are, but beautiful of my own beauty. This is why I am drawn to love you. Who can say how confounded I remained? More than ever. but may everything be for his glory. August 8th, 1899. A resigned soul is rest for Jesus. He continues to make himself seen, for just a little, and almost indignant with men. As much as I prayed him to pour his bitternesses into me, it was impossible. And without paying attention to what I was saying to him, he told me, "Resignation absorbs all that can be painful and disgusting to one's nature, and renders it sweet. And since my being is peaceful, tranquil, in such a way that, no matter what may happen in heaven and on earth, it cannot receive the slightest breath of disturbance, resignation has the virtue of grafting these very virtues of mine into the soul. A resigned soul is always at rest, and not only herself, but she also makes me rest peacefully within her." August 10th, 1899. On Justice and the Fruits of Justice, Truth and Simplicity. How Jesus remains wounded by simplicity. This morning, as my sweet Jesus came, he transported me outside of myself, and he disappeared. As he left me alone, I saw as though 2 candelabra of fire descending from heaven, which then, dividing into many pieces, formed many lightnings and much hail that came down upon the earth, causing very great torment over plants and men. The horror and the vehemence of the thunderstorm was such that one could not even pray, and people could not manage to withdraw into their homes. Who can say how frightened I was left? So I began to pray in order to placate the Lord. And as he came back, I saw that he was carrying an iron rod in his hand, which had a ball of fire at the top. He told me, "My justice has been withheld for a long time, and with reason it wants to take revenge on the creatures who have dared to destroy every justice within themselves. Ah, yes, I find nothing just in man. He has counterfeited himself completely in his words, in his works, and steps. Everything is deception. Everything is fraud. Everything is injustice, which have penetrated into his heart in such a way that inside and out he is but a bilge of vices. Poor man, how you have reduced yourself." While saying this, he was swinging the rod he had in his hand, in act of wounding man. I said to him, "Lord, what are you doing?" And he, "Do not fear. See, this ball of fire will cause fire, but will only strike the evil. The good will receive no harm." And I added, "Oh, Lord, who is good? We are all evil. I beg you not to look at us, but at your infinite mercy. In this way you will be placated for all." After this he added, "The daughter of justice is truth. Just as I am the eternal truth, as I do not deceive, nor can I be deceived, in the same way the soul who possesses justice makes truth shine in all her actions. Therefore, since she knows by experience the true light of truth, if someone wants to deceive her, since that light which she feels within herself is missing, she immediately recognizes the deceit. And so it happens that with this light of truth, she does not deceive either herself or her neighbor, nor can she be deceived. The fruit produced by this justice and by this truth is simplicity. Another quality of my being is to be simple, so much so that I penetrate everywhere. There is nothing that can prevent me from penetrating inside. I penetrate into heaven and into the abysses, into good and into evil. However, my being, most simple, by penetrating even into evil, does not get dirty. Even more, it does not receive the slightest shadow. In the same way, through justice and truth, gathering into herself this beautiful fruit of simplicity, the soul penetrates into heaven. She enters into the hearts to lead them to me. She penetrates into everything that is good. And if she finds herself with sinners, in seeing the evil that they do, she does not get dirty, because being simple, she immediately brushes it off without receiving any harm. Simplicity is so beautiful that my heart remains wounded at one gaze alone of a simple soul. She is the admiration of angels and of men. You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 2, Part 6. Fiat.